Well, good morning, Glue Troopers. I'm off to work today, as you guys know, but I wanted to get out a quick video because there have been a couple of developments and also something that I wanted to talk about real quick. First off, just a reminder, B25 build is due to come out on the group build video is due to come out on Doolittle's birthday. I believe that's the 27th of this month. So if you can get the pictures to me by the 25th, and the other thing I wanted to mention was, if you're not going to get your model done, send me pictures of your work in progress, and we'll include that. Remember, this is all in good fun. It's not a contest. It's a let's share what we've been doing sort of thing. And when you finish the model, send me more pictures, and we'll put those in a later video. So there's that. Also, I have some pretty interesting news. A former Aurora and I believe Revell executive, Jim Keeler, was able to make contact with him, and we're probably going to do a Zoom session somewhere around the end of the month. And Jim's got tons of great stories about the naked behind the scenes of the kit model industry, and also that'll be great. So I hope you guys, I hope we can get that put together. And if not, we'll maybe do it next month. But I'm hoping to do it at the end of this month. Whenever, we'll see how our schedules work out. Now, the other thing is a builder named Adam, and not Mr. Adams down in New Zealand, but another builder named Adam has gotten back into, or he's gotten into model building, and he said that he built this Spitfire, and he was asking about weathering and said that he feared he over-weathered it. And that brought up an interesting point, because I've been hearing some people, or reading some people in the comments talking about weathering aircraft lately. And that brings up an interesting point. Weathering aircraft, it is really easy to over-weather aircraft, because let's face it, weathering models is fun, You get to see the work, when you were chipping the paint and everything. And it really does start bringing the life out of the thing. Man, this is really starting to look good. And of course, it's easy to overdo it. Now, my research has showed that the aircraft in Europe, particularly the American aircraft, but generally speaking, the aircraft in the European theater tended to look in better condition than the aircraft in the Pacific. The aircraft in the Pacific, some of those, even, Marine Corps and naval aircraft, sometimes got pretty beat up looking, especially the Marine Corps aircraft. Now, this is not a knock on the Marines. It's just they worked in places like, the Cactus Air Force. These guys are working in some pretty primitive environments. And things like, paint on the aircraft or washing the plane just wasn't a priority. The Navy, particularly operating off of carriers, the crew chiefs, that airplane was their pride and joy. So they tended to look pretty good, provided they were on a ship which had the resources and the facilities necessary. The aircraft that were based on Army airfields could also get very remote, but the Army being the Army, certainly had an image to uphold, and they, again, crew chiefs, really want their plane to look good. So as far as the American aircraft go, it's really easy to overweather them. I've looked at a lot of photographs of a lot of aircraft, and the American aircraft, both the Pacific and the European theater, usually look to be in pretty good condition. And you had oil streaks and you had the gun smoke, but a lot of times that was cleaned off between missions and kind of reflected the crew chief. But the guys in the Corps, and I'm speaking in generalities, not absolutes, but the guys in the Corps out on these really remote islands with often struggling for supplies, sometimes they got to looking kind of rough, but not unserviceable looking. I mean, paint flaking off, oil and stuff, but even so, they still did a pretty good job. You can always just go check some reference photos. During the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force, the planes could start to look a little worn because they were flying 3-4 missions a day. In some cases at the height of the battle, I think even more than that in some cases. So they could get, kind of grimy because they didn't have time to clean up the oil streaks and the gun smoke and everything. But normally, and as much for probably tactical reasons as anything else, normally they did a pretty good job of keeping the paint and everything on them in pretty good condition. And the German aircraft were the same way. The Russian aircraft, partly because of the often cold climate, again, outside of chip paint, some oil streaks, most of the photos I've shown, they were in pretty good shape. You got to give them credit. The aircraft that really, really, really looked rough were the late war Japanese aircraft, because we had actually talked about this in a previous video. Between all the bombing and everything of their factories, they were running out of the good quality paint. They ran almost completely out of primer, so they were putting paint right on metal, and it was just flaking off all the time. So kind of in a flip of that, it's kind of hard to overweather a late war Japanese aircraft. Some of them were down to almost straight aluminum. And when you deal with aircraft later in the war, like the B-29s that were aluminum, didn't have paint on them. They were mostly just a naked aluminum skin. Other than some oil streaks, those planes. And my dad was a B-29 mechanic, and the Air Force is the Air Force. They kept them. You could see the wear, you could see the soot and stuff, but that's it. It's really easy to overweather an aircraft. And I think Adam did a great job on this model. And given that it's only his fourth model, I'm super impressed. So, and also we've had some other viewers that telling me that they've gotten back into model building after watching this channel, which, believe me, is the biggest compliment I can possibly. It just gives me a warm fuzzy when folks tell me that, either got into or got back into model building after watching the channel. And I just, that warms my insides like a double shot of Kentucky bourbon. So but as far as weathering goes, I would always recommend checking a resource photo, and thanks to the interweb, that's pretty easy these days. It is easy to overweather an airplane. And it's a little hard to get the weathering off once you put it on. But whereas at the flip side, armor vehicles, like ground vehicles, it's almost impossible to overweather those. They got just so beat up. But it's funny if you really want to kind of take someone out of a diorama, make this nice diorama with all these nicely weathered vehicles, and then put one vehicle in there that has no weathering, and all of a sudden you feel like you're looking at a toy. And having been in the Army, I have just, it's amazing. The guys that live down in the motor pool taking care of their vehicles. And because all the flat, subdued colors, the vehicles always looked a little, I guess the word would be dusty, just by nature it was intended. But get them out in the field for a few days or a week, everything gets caked in mud, everything gets dirt, and they're constantly fighting off the rust. And the anti-corrosive stuff back then wasn't as good as it is now. And you realize, you pretty much cannot overweather a vehicle. It's just, but aircraft are a whole nother story. Ships probably have the widest range, because you get a ship that's just come out of, a refit or something where it's all fresh paint and everything. And it looks pretty nice, but you guys know the salt air environment, it does not take long for the rust to start setting in. And, you add a few streaks of rust to any ship and it makes it look rough, but it also makes it look accurate. And even when I tour these ships today, you can see they're constantly fighting the battle against rust. So weathering a ship, probably has the widest range of clean to dirty to rusty that I could, at least a steel ship. Well, we're talking like World War II types today. Well, I don't know. I saw some of those, what do they call it? They're the reserve ships. They're owned by the Navy, but they're operated by civilians. And they're cargo ships. It's the reserve, like a reserve maritime fleet, but they have the special bands around the funnel that show that owned by the government but operated by civilians. They're not combat vessels, but anyway, you look at it. I saw a couple of them recently, and I was thinking, from a distance they look good, but you get close, the weathering, the fact they've been sitting there a while really starts to show pretty quickly if you know what you're looking for. They ain't cruise ships. So yeah, weathering is an interesting thing. It's really easy to overdo it. But my suggestion would be subtle layers, look at a reference photo, and but then again, you know what? Make it what you want it to be. So guys, throw me your comments in there about what you think about weathering models. We'll talk at you later, and as always, model on.